Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the NAC Retreat Week. I'm Dan Borschke, NAC's Executive Vice President. It is my honor and privilege to introduce the next hour of programming. First of all, many thanks to our sponsors who, without their generosity, we would be unable to conduct this week-long educational experience. Chris, if you could advance the sponsors. Our sponsors include Coca-Cola, Gold Medal, Hershey Chocolate, Mars Wrigley, Rico's Products Company, Load King, Pepsi, Vistar, ConAgra, PCI, Park Packaging Concepts Incorporated, Promotion in Motion, Great Western Products, ConAgra, Colonel Seasons, Manel Popcorn, Odell's, Preferred Popcorn, and Scribner and Associates. Like many of our members, NAC is certainly experiencing financial distress during these challenging times. So we thank all our members for their support and engagement as we all journey through this once in a century experience. If you'd like to assist the NAC education efforts, please visit the donate button at the NAC Retreat Week website page. Before we introduce this morning's session, hope you could join us this afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 noon Central, when you join us for the buyer-seller relationships. Our hosts will be Teresa Boyson from Colonel Seasons and Kim Cook Serrano from Galaxy Theaters. They'll be moderating a spectacular panel of experts that will include Pat Michelizzi from National Amusements, Tim Farha from Ferraro Candy, Christopher Bryan from Southern Theaters, Mike Koski from Sodexo Centerplate, Siobhan Scalamanga from PepsiCo, Christine Fellner and Jill King from Vistar, Chris Shortino from AICP, Dave Goofer from the Lacrosse Center, and then Stephen Fox from Trinchero Family Estates. Don't forget, all sessions are accessible via the same link you used for today's session. The one exception is tomorrow afternoon's wine tasting event, which will have a unique link generated directly from Copper Cane. If you don't already have that link, please visit the NAC website. You can download the link to a wonderful wine experience tomorrow afternoon. If you have any questions during today's session, please use the Q&A function on the lower portion of the Zoom page. And we are very proud to announce that we have about 360 registrants for this week's sessions. Finally, each session will have door prizes. If you won anything yesterday, sorry, you're not eligible for today. But the names of those winners will be announced by Chris Dahman at the end of this session, and frankly, after every session this week. So good luck. Today's session is something very special. Dr. Radesh Palakurthi, Dean and Instructor of the Kemmons Wilson School of Hospitality and Resort Management at the University of Memphis, will be revealing his latest research on streaming versus in-theater viewing. Joining Dr. Palakurthi is NAC's Director of Education and Senior Vice President at Malco Theaters, Larry Etter. So without further ado, Radesh, it's all yours. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dan and Chris. And Chris, is the screen mine or?
It is yours. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, hold on one second.
Radesh, I think this is where you tell the jokes or something, right?
Yeah, you tell the jokes while I'm trying to, because
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop.
yeah,
my screen
okay, there
share.
you go. You
Okay.
need to stop, right?
Okay.
Exactly. So now I
there you
can
go.
share. Okay, I apologize, folks. So good morning again. This is Radesh. I'm the Dean of the Kemmons Wilson School at University of Memphis. And Larry, of course, is our adjunct professor and also a good friend. He's on our advisory board. And Larry always gives us ideas about what's important for the industry. And we decided to do a research on the relationship or the attitudes and opinions about movie streaming and about the movie theaters industry, the beliefs and opinions and how they compare with each other. So the goal of this research was to find out what actually distinguished movie theaters from streaming services. That was the core emphasis of this research. It was part of another study that we did last year. And so it wasn't a study in itself, but it was a big part of another study that we had done for NAC. The survey was conducted using a panel of moviegoers. We always like to go back to Qualtrics, as you know, is a company that has over 10 million panel members across the globe. And you can actually slice and dice that and have screening questions to get the population that you're really looking for. So we conducted this research in March of 2019. This is pre-pandemic, and I think is a good way to compare apples with apples, because right now things are different with streaming and why people stream and so on. So it's a good snapshot of what it used to be, and it's a good comparative study, I think. The survey began with 35 statements that were based on a strongly agree and strongly disagree Likert scale. 1 is strongly agree, 5 is strongly disagree. And there were also some satisfaction questions in there on a same 5-point Likert scale, where 1 is strongly, extremely satisfied, and 5 is extremely dissatisfied. So we used a technique, as 35 questions is 35 variables. That's a lot of questions, and we really can't make sense out of it if we're trying to dig deeper into the attitudes and opinions. So there is a statistical process called factor analysis, which basically is a dimension reducing technique in statistics. So what it does is it allows you to reduce the 35 questions down to some core constructs that capture the essence of what people are trying to say. So we use that technique. It's called principal component analysis. And what we came up with are the 5 core factors in this research, and we'll describe those in detail today. We had a total of 420 usable responses. Usable implies that the people were screened to be eligible to answer the questions. And also the data was validated and their questionnaires were complete, in the sense they didn't leave out questions, they didn't randomly put 5 on all questions and so on. So there's some data checks that they had done to make sure they were valid. So we're very confident about the data that we have here, and the demographics of the respondents is pretty straightforward. It is, we think, in line with the average moviegoers. By design, we asked for a gender mix of 50-50% each. Based on the Qualtrics panel from our previous research, they tend to skew more towards females than males. And so we made it a concerted effort to, we told them that we needed a sample of 50-50, and that's what we ended up with. In terms of the age demographics, most of the respondents, 77% of the respondents, were between the age groups of 18 to 54, which is in line with what we have with moviegoers. And the race to whites were about 2/3 of the population, blacks were 1/5, Asians about 1 in 10. So this is in line with, I think, what we have for the general population of moviegoers. Same with, let me try to hide the floating screen. So can you all see that better now with the floating screen gone? Okay. So the annual household income of the respondents, as you can see, they're pretty evenly distributed. 30 to 60K is 34%, less than 30K is 31, 60 to 90K is 19%. Most of them had a bachelor's degree, and some college or an associate degree. Bachelor's degree was the next highest, 26%. So Larry, do you want to add anything to this, or?
No, I would say that the demographics presented by Qualtrics were in line with what we see from other surveys that we've done, and align themselves with the statistics that NATO gives us. I think it's going to be important that the people understand, once they see these demographics, they'll understand the majority of people that we're interviewing are in the range of going to movies and streaming. I think that it's kind of important that everybody sees that some 90% of the respondents have at least a bachelor's degree or some higher education. So it seems to be relatively that the respondents are educated. That's really what I'm trying to say.
Right. Thank you. We collected other demographics too about family type and profession and so on, which we didn't list here. So that's one thing. So this research is about streaming. So it would be important for us to know a little bit more about the type of companies that were included here. At least it's a snapshot of March of 2019. So in this section, we'll be presenting results on the companies and their usage and their intent to use statistics. This is a busy chart. Let me forewarn you, most of this research is a lot of charts. And that's why we asked for a full screen access. Please get close to your screens. If you can't see the numbers, I apologize at a time. So the ones that we had here are Amazon Prime, Fubo, HBO Now, Hulu, Netflix, Philo TV, PlayStation View, Play-Doh, Sling, YouTube TV, and others. So these were the top ones in those days in March of 2019, top 10 that we could come up with, and we put them in. The type of questions that we asked was, I've been using it for less than a year. I've been using it for 1 to 2 years, more than 2 years. I intend to subscribe soon, or I do not intend to subscribe. You can see the color coding here. And as you all know, in this, PlayStation View was shut down in January of this year. So that's no longer there. And if you don't know any of these companies, the newer ones, Fubo TV is more geared towards sports aficionados. They're a very focused type streaming service for live events and so on. Philo TV is actually the other one that you may or may not know. Philo is actually run by or owned by Mark Cuban. It's a live on-demand TV service and so on. And they had an interesting background. They're growing very fast. They grew 300% this year with about almost 1 million subscribers. Pluto TV, on the other hand, is part of the DirecTV streaming service. It's owned by Viacom, and they're also growing pretty rapidly. So if you look at this, the ones that we see are the blue color coding is for using it less than a year. And then the brown is for using it between 1 and 2 years, and the gray is for more than 2 years. So if you add these three up, it tells you sort of the people that are using it at various stages. And needless to say, the top ones are Netflix, Prime, Hulu, YouTube, and HBO Now. These are the ones that were highest being used. And Netflix with the highest, with about 45% having it more than 2 years. So we asked them about satisfaction. And if you look at the satisfaction, we did that. We only took the extremely satisfied scale on that 5-point scale, which basically is all the people who rated it 1. Okay, extremely satisfied is 1. And so only the people that rated it 1, you can see the percentages are pretty high. And if you add those, these are blue again, is for people who have had it for less than 1 year. Brown is between 1 and 2 years, and more than 2 years is the gray section. So you see the satisfaction levels across the board are pretty high for Netflix, Hulu, HBO Now. But interestingly, the newer ones like Philo and PlayStation View, which is extinct now, they had pretty high ratings the first year subscribers. So it's kind of surprising why. I mean, they mentioned that PlayStation View shut down because they couldn't compete in the market anymore. But their satisfaction rates, at least at those in the beginning, were pretty high. relatively to the other streaming services.
Radesh, I think it's
Yeah.
important that we kind of show something that you're going to show in the next slide as well. But
Yeah.
what we found is that the longer people subscribe to streaming
Yeah.
services, their satisfaction rates start to drop dramatically.
Right.
And because it's relatively new, one thing that we don't have here is Disney Plus. It's somewhat of a newer invention and falls into other. It grew significantly after March of 2020. So that's another aspect of competitive advantage. But I do want to point out for the participants, the people, that it seems to be very apparent, and even in the next slide, you're going to see the longer people have a streaming service, the less satisfied they are with that particular service.
Right, and it would be important to point out there were other streaming services that were covered in the other section, and some of the ones they mentioned were like ethnic streaming services like Hotstar, which is a Bollywood movie streaming service, and then Aparat, believe it's a YouTube for Iran. Then they also mentioned Fight and Crunchyroll, which is an Japanese anime streaming service that was just bought out by Sony for $1 billion. Then they also mentioned the ones that are slightly on the illegal side, like Plex and Showbox that do pirated content. So Showbox is not there anymore, but these were some of the other ones that were covered in the other streaming services that they were using in March. We also thought it would be an important thing to see if having a home theater would have a difference in the satisfaction level with the cable service or the streaming services. What we found is that the people who did have theaters had a slightly higher satisfaction level, reported a satisfaction level with streaming services than people who did not, but it is not statistically different. So really, it doesn't make a difference whether you have a theater or not. That's essentially the takeaway from the slide, okay? Then we also tried to drill down further to see if there was a difference in that satisfaction level with streaming service, if they had a movie theater by the type of streaming service they had. And again, by by the duration of time they've been subscribing. Interestingly, the PlayStation Vue and Fubo TV, these showed up having overall higher satisfaction levels than the traditional ones or the big five. And the reason is these were streaming live sporting events, and these are always better on a home theater and on a big screen. And that may be the reason why some of the extremely high ratings came out when they had a home theater for these sort of newer services. We also tried to see if the satisfaction levels were moderated by gender, and we noticed that generally, the satisfaction levels with streaming services are higher, because if you look at the scale, 1 is extremely satisfied, 5 is extremely dissatisfied. So the lower the numbers are, the more they are satisfied. So you can see that the overall satisfaction level with streaming services is higher than for home theaters. That is generally what you see, but the difference by gender is non-existent. So both male and females are seeing the same when it comes to satisfaction levels with that. We also did a comparative study by age. Again, we found no difference in the statistical difference. So age has no impact on their reported satisfaction levels with home theaters or streaming services. We did the same with income levels, and again, there was no impact. So all 3 important demographic factors have no impact on reported satisfaction levels with home theaters or streaming services. So now we get to the core of our presentation, which is about the difference in opinion, or the core key factors that the respondents perceive to be between streaming services and movie theaters. So for this, we came up with 35 questions that were, I'll tell you this, they were strongly biased towards movies. And it came out very nicely when you look at the section about they pointed out that, yeah, we know you're biased towards movie theaters here. So these were strongly skewed to benefit the movie theaters. And we asked the people whether they strongly agreed or strongly disagreed with those statements. So those 35 questions were then reduced to 5 core factors. This is the overall, and we'll dig into the details in a minute. This chart looks a little bit complex, but it is not very difficult. And I'll need Larry's help in describing this.
Yeah, so let me back
go
up just a little bit, Radesh.
Yeah.
When the 35 questions were presented, when the results came back, what Qualtrics told us were that it seemed that there were certain questions that fell into a particular category. And so as you see this particular screen, you'll see the 5 different categories that are listed. It's a little bit confusing, but you'll understand a little bit more as we get into it. So for example, the first piece was coexistence. And the questions that you'll see as we digest this shows kind of an agreement that people believe that streaming and movies can coexist. Now, when you look at the top of that graph and you see 8.8%, what that really does is it says that it's 8.8% higher than what average would be. In other words, that 8.8 says that this number here is a very strong relationship where people believe movie theaters and streaming can coexist. So when you go to presentation superiority, people believe specifically that movie theaters have a better presentation, and represented by the 5.3% that says, yes, this is very strong. It's a good statement, very true. So as we get through that, there were a number of questions. I think there are 9 questions that fell into the uniqueness that movie theaters offer versus streaming. There were a few questions that fall into motivational factors. Why are people motivated to go to movie theaters? Again, they have a strong alliance with going to movie theaters. And then the competitive landscape. This is interesting because this is almost the reverse. In other words, these questions were asked almost in reverse in favor of streaming versus going to movie theaters. And so as Radesh goes through these next 5 categories, you'll see some of the key points that the advantages that movie theaters have over streaming.
Okay, thanks, Larry. So just to summarize, these terms here, that these factors that came up were coined by us. So basically, we looked at the 35 questions, and after factor analysis, those were split across these 5 factors. And you'll see those in the next few slides. And by reading those questions, you kind of know what construct they're trying to capture. And so we came up with these these terminology to actually describe the combination of all of those questions. That's what factor analysis allows you to do. So if you look on this scale, coexistence overall had a 2.23 rating on a scale of 1 to 5, which means it's in the agreement zone. So anything below 3 means that they are all agreeing with all the statements that make up each of these factors, right? So the average is 2.3, and the overall average was 2.44 for the entire survey. So if you look at 2.23, compare it with 2.44, the 8.8% more agreement is happening with coexistence. So on an average, if they're agreeing 2.44, the respondents are agreeing that coexistence can happen with the streaming and movie industry about 8.8% more. So if you go on, and then presentation superiority essentially captures that movies have a better presentation offering than streaming. Okay, so that's what that means. Uniqueness is the experience at the theater is more unique than streaming. That's what that's capturing. Motivation is basically, why do I go to the movie is different than why do I go Why do I watch a movie at home? And then competitive landscape, this, as Larry mentioned, is basically people, we asserted that movie theaters are extremely competitive, or more competitive than streaming. And there's a little bit of disagreement. So they had to, they're basically agreeing less about that. Okay, so that's what it means. So let's look at each one of these factors, dig into the details. So these are the 9 questions that actually came up, loaded, as they call it in factor analysis, into these. So you should see these are called factor loadings. And the highlighted ones are basically telling you how strongly each of these questions relate to uniqueness. So the higher the number is, you can see it as sort of the rank order in which you should read these, going from 1 through 9. So if you look at the question here, the amenities offered at movie theaters, recliners, chairs, game rooms, extended menu options, positively add to the experience compared to digital streaming. That is strongly loading to the uniqueness factor that shows you with the high number. And that is the number 1 item that relates to uniqueness. The ambience, the decor, smell of popcorn, excitement, all of that is a thrilling experience compared to digital streaming that they don't get at home. That is another uniqueness factor. Now, if you look at the rating index, they're basically saying they agree with this statement. They more agree with this statement than average, 5% more, 4% more. So the immersive experience presented at theaters cannot be duplicated through digital streaming at home theater. Is strongly loading again. So these are the factors that are actually unique about movie theaters that cannot be duplicated at home. And not only are that tells you exactly what factors are unique about movie theaters, and also the fact that they are agreeing with you. We won't spend a lot of time going through each one of them. We'll just touch the top 3.
Hey, Radesh, if
next,
you don't mind,
yeah.
can you go back?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so let's do this. For the lay people, when they look at that rating index, when they see a positive 5%, let me just describe it like this. What that's saying is it's not only true and they believe it, but it's a very strong true. Anything above 1% is really saying it's a very strong true. If you look at the bottom, like 8 and 9, we see very low loading factors. Okay, what that really means, it's not all that important to visualizing a movie in a theater, but it is true. So for example, movie technology such as 3D, IMAX, available at movie theaters makes them a lot more compelling. They kind of believe that. Yeah, that's an important kind of a question. But when it gets to the rating index, it's very, very true that the presentation does have an impact. And then the other average that you need to look at, and I hope people will pay attention to, is that 2.5 satisfaction rating as an average. Watch those numbers as we go through the different slides, because you'll find out that the first 9 questions, people do find movie theaters very unique, but there are going to be some other things like motivational factors and coexistence that are going to rate even higher than that.
Right. So you can see this as importance of the factor or the question for the uniqueness, and then you can see this as their degree of agreement with the question. So that's kind of how it is. So if you look at competitive landscape, now the first thing that we already mentioned, so you can see the questions, the way they are framed, they're totally biased for movie theaters, right? I have more options to watch movies I want at a movie theater compared to what's available through digital streaming. So they say that's an important factor for being being competitive, but the fact that it is negative tells you they're relating with the opposite end of the scale, with the 5 rather than the 1. And they are disagreeing with that. They are agreeing with that to a lesser extent. So basically they're saying, hey, researchers, you're trying to trick us. I know these questions are biased towards movie theaters. And so we're going to, if you switch them around, we'll give you positive loadings. That's essentially what it is.
Well,
so they're basically, yeah.
I want to stress that when you see the negative rating index, it's really saying this is a false statement. So if you were to read this statement again, the respondent is saying false. And then when you see the negative 0.79 and the -6, it's really false, 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 as opposed to just a moderate false.
Basically, they're asking you to switch the question from a bias towards movies to bias towards streaming. That's essentially, if you did that in these questions, all of these would turn positive. So they're basically telling you that. And this is, so in terms of the competitive landscape, these factors are still important because that's what this 0.79, 0.71 tell you. And so it doesn't diminish the fact that these factors are important in deciding competitiveness of theaters versus movies, except that they're saying don't try to trick us, is what they're trying to say. So that's what it is.
The other thing that this really states is, if you reverse the question, for example, number 3, watching a movie at a theater is more convenient than digital streaming. It's a false statement. What they're really saying is the advantage for streaming is convenience. Number 2, price value. The advantage for streaming is a price value. So they consider pricing to be less or a better value for streaming. And the options, the categories, the libraries of movies available at streaming is much greater than at a movie theater. All of these are somewhat common sense. So there's nothing really surprising here.
Right. And if you look at the watching movie at the theater is more convenient than digitally streaming a movie, again, bias towards movie theaters, it is important factor, okay? But then they are less agreeing with that, about 9% less than the average, okay? So it's a 3 and the average is 2.7. So that is why competitive landscape, as you saw in the summary, is actually trending, the bar was higher than everything else. So essentially what this means is that streaming and theaters, they do not see the movie theaters as being as competitive as streaming as we are making it seem. Essentially, that's what it is. Okay. Motivational factor. This is basically, if you look at the first question, you'll see movie theaters are only for seeing new movies that I'm excited about, and the rest can be digitally streamed. That's loading. That's number 1 for motivation for going to theaters. They're in average 8% more in agreement. Movie theaters are for blockbusters, where digital streaming is for whatever grabs my attention. They're okay with that. They're neutral on it, but it's loading up heavily. So what motivates people, if you really look at it, is blockbuster movies and new movies. That's why they go. So those are ranking up very high in terms of motivation of why they go to the movies. Larry, you want to add anything?
Well, I would say that even if we had more time and we could go through question by question.
Yeah.
Watching movies, number 4, in a movie theater honors cinematography while digital streaming on a small screen does not. It loads fairly high and the average is pretty good, but the rating index is flat. So the people do want to honor cinematography. That's one of the other things that I think came out of this. For example, number 8, movie theater screenings are a pinnacle of cinematic achievement, while digital streaming is not. It doesn't load high, the ratings aren't high, and it's with the -3% really kind of is a false statement. They don't necessarily agree with that.
Right.
And what that really says, I think, is that the cinema achievement is really related. It's done. It's a factor, but it's already completed, so it can be seen either in theater or by streaming device. So it's really not a big motivator one way or the other.
Right. So one thing I want to point out in factor analysis, anytime the loadings are below 0.4, generally you tend to ignore them. They're not considered to be as high, as strong and a factor to or a question to be included in there. But we wanted to account for all 35 because it did load. I just put that in there just for discussion. But these two, 7 and 8, would really not, in an academic paper, we would not even list them as part of that factor. Then we also did a presentation superiority. That's the factor number 4. Digital streaming cannot match audio and video quality offered at movie theaters, strongly loading, and they are in agreement, more than average. And movie studios offer fresh content while digital streaming offers displays the leftover. They kind of didn't like the wording there, but they are in agreement. It's strongly loading. And the -5 basically tells you that they didn't like the semantics of the question. The last factor is coexistence. I guess this is the one that we all want to know more about. I see the movie theater and digital streaming companies as two distinct services that can be used together. That's loading up very high, but they are 7% less in agreement with that. And that's because they're reading this as two distinct services rather than can be used together. Okay, but the key things are here. You can see about coexistence. There's some difference in understanding there, but take question number 3, for example. One does not have to stop watching movies in a theater just because of their digital streaming habits. It loads heavily, and it's a 1.9. They are 14% above average in agreement with that question. So that itself is a strong indication that coexistence can happen, okay? And I will never stop going to the movie theaters because of the availability of digital streaming. Again, strongly loading, it's important, and they are 4% above average in agreement. So this is a case for a coexistence in our mind. Yeah.
Radesh, I would point out to the people participating that 1.9 on average rating is basically the strongest of all the questions that we asked.
Yes.
And that 14% is the highest variance of any of the questions we asked. So if we went back and we looked at, all the questions that we asked, which one did they really kind of lean toward the most? And it really says one does not have to stop watching movies in a theater just because they have digital streaming. In other words, what we're starting to find out as you go through these slides is people are not going to quit going to movies. They have an allegiance to movie theaters for a variety of reasons. Presentation is one of the primary ones. And while they can be used together, they tend to prefer movie theaters over streaming in a much, I think, stronger kind of position. They really want to go to movie theaters more than they want to sit at home and stream.
Right. So we tried to see if these factors differed by demographics, and we did some statistical analysis with the 5 factors in gender. What you notice is that the brown is the male and the blue is the female, and the lower the score is, they're more in agreement. So not all of them are statistically significant: competitive landscape, uniqueness, and presentation superiority. So these 3 factors where actually the men seem to have a more positive opinion, slightly more positive than women. So that's essentially, and statistically different. 2.2 is different than 2.4, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to presentation superiority, men believe movie theaters have it more, are better than what females think. And the same thing with competitive landscape and uniqueness. We looked at the same 5 factors with age, and you would see that all of them were significant in some way. So the averages by age were all different. Generally, what you find is this blue bar is higher than the other ones, and higher again indicates you're leaning more towards strong disagreement than agreement, right, with those questions. So generally 18 to 24-year-old age group tend to less strongly agree about all the factors compared with other age groups. So because they're higher, they're less in agreement with the others. But when it comes to coexistence, you see that the trend is going downwards, except for the green line, which is 65 plus. That might be because of the sample size we had there. But what you're noticing here when it comes to coexistence is that the younger population tends to think tend to less agree that coexistence is possible compared to the older generation.
Yeah, Radesh,
Okay.
I think this is where I want to interject something that's we have to be careful with. One is just because the 18 to 24-year-old has a little bit higher number, like 2.4, that it's still not approaching like 3, which would be average.
Yes.
The other thing that I think that neither you or I took into account when we were doing this is related to the concession side of the business. When we do studies on concessions, we find that the 18 to 24-year-old demographic spends the least amount of money at the concession stand. They have less discretionary income, and their less discretionary income may lead them to do things at home as opposed to going out to movie theaters and buying movie tickets. So that may have some effect on why that 2.4 in the 18 to 24-year-old is a little stronger. If you look at the middle group, the age group between 25 and say 55, all of those are very strong, agree movie theaters have advantages. So, you know, just for the people that are participating, if you look at that center section, those are the people that have money, and typically are the ones that are spending their discretionary income at cinemas.
Right. So, so we did find that the factors differ by age. That essentially that's what we found. And then, but household income didn't seem to have an impact at all. Okay, so we looked at household income and all the age groups that we had. And the essential thing to keep in mind is anything below 3 is an agreement zone. Okay, so they're all agreeing with most of the statements. If, like Larry pointed out, anything that goes beyond 3, if any of those averages were beyond 3, like 3.5, 4, 4.5, then we would be in trouble because they're not agreeing with anything. But generally, they're all agreeing with most of the statements, but it's only the degree of agreement that's changing a little bit. And we were trying to see if there's statistical difference between those agreements, levels of agreements. So income doesn't seem to have a factor. Then we also had 11 additional statements that were about beliefs about movie theaters compared to streaming, okay? And we did a similar factor analysis, and it broke down into 2 factors. One was called a positive, we called it positive image factor. Out of the 11, 9 loaded up on the positive image. So the statement, and these were very strong loadings, 0.8, 0.87. Some of these are pretty high because it can go up to 1. So I believe that the movie theaters are an integral part of the local community. 0.8, it's a very strong factor in a positive image. I have a very positive opinion about movie theaters. 2.3, 2.3. I often talk positively about movie theater experiences with my friends and family. Again, loading at a 0.75. They're all more than average in agreement with those. But if you look at, Larry, you want to talk about 8 and 9?
Well, they're falling to the bottom of and getting closer to that 0.4 number that you had mentioned earlier.
Right.
But it says, I try to sway people to go to see a movie theater when there is an opportunity. You're going to see in just a second that that's kind of a little bit in conflict with the next category.
Right.
They're basically saying that's false, that they don't necessarily try to talk people into going to see movies. You're going to see in a minute that it's a very
Right.
Word of mouth is a motivational factor. And then the fact that they prefer to see a movie theater rather than go to local festivals, I think that's talking about discretionary time. And so they don't necessarily see going to a movie outweighs going to a concert or an outdoor festival or some of those kinds of other entertainment venues. So that's not really competing with streaming, but it's showing that there is some competition with other entertainment venues.
Right. So I do want to point out that this question number 9 essentially revolves around, do moviegoers see movies as quote unquote the other place? So we have the other place is basically the home, office, and then the other place. The other place, like Starbucks is another place. That's another place to hang out. So essentially what we're finding from this one statement is they are, when it comes to preference, they are basically saying they don't forego festivals to go see a movie, you know, because they are 10% in disagreement with more than average agreement with that statement. But Larry and I did another research to actually see if movie theaters can be the other place compared to, let's say, Starbucks or restaurants or other places. And that research has been concluded. We did it. And if we get an opportunity, we'll present that. So we built an entire research around that one question about, can movie theaters be other places? Can they be places where people can hold weddings, or, you know, whatever it is, events and family events and so on. So we'll present that at some point.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah.
Expand on that just a little bit, Radesh. What Radesh is doing is he's giving you a spoiler alert. One of the things that we did some research on is, can movie theaters be a third-party gathering place? In other words, a place where you meet your friends just to have some conversation and so forth and so on. And Radesh and I did not think that movie theaters would be their first choice. Turns out we kind of believe places like Starbucks or, parks or zoos or places like that would be more of a third-party meeting place. And it turns out that movie theaters are the preferred meeting place when people want to get together and just say hello, how you doing, and catch up. And so we had an opportunity to present this at CinemaCon this year, and I suggested to Radesh that putting out that information with COVID-19 and people trying to social distance, that would be probably the wrong time to release something about third-party meeting places. So we decided to hold off on that.
Right. Okay. And then the second factor, or the last one we'll discuss in terms of the table, is the quality of service provided by theaters. I believe that the service quality provided movie theaters is better than the service quality provided by other services such as restaurants and hotels. Very strongly loading on that, and they are 2% in agreement. So that is something that is another positive thing about movies. They think this quality of service is higher compared to the similar industries. So in conclusion,
Radesh, you need to go back.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Question number 2 here is very important for people in the theater industry.
Yeah.
It says, I see movie theaters as a resource for more than just watching movies and as hosting events, playing video games, or having a good meal. While it loaded very high, that rating index of -2 is really showing there's disagreement. In other words, the way that's translated is that they see movie theaters as a place to watch movie theaters, but not other events. And I think that's important for us to understand, because we're trying to pivot our business right now. We're trying to find out other ways to use our buildings to help pay for the rent and the overhead and so forth and so on. And I think that's kind of an interesting question for us to kind of examine going forward.
Yeah, and that's the other place research that we're talking about. So we'll present that when it comes to that. So in conclusion, I know we're cutting close on time here. So streaming services are constantly evolving, garner high satisfaction rates. That is revealed by just analyzing the companies and their satisfactions. Streaming services people are happy with what they get. Compared to streaming services, now comparing movie theaters to them, typical movie theater ambience and amenities are the strongest uniqueness factors. So basically, when people think of movie theaters, we can have all these innovations that come in, like CGI and all of those. The people seem to be seeing those as distinct from what the movie theaters have to offer. That is what the studios do with the movies. But the thing that actually makes make movie theaters unique is that buzz of being there, the smell of the popcorns, having the ability to spill popcorn all around you, hanging out with your friends and looking at the, and not having your mom scold you when you spill Coke, Also, so the traditional excitement that comes with going to the movies is the uniqueness that is lacking, is the difference between streaming at home and going to the theater. So we're trying to rebrand ourselves and create that spark and have people come back. Don't tell them about these CGI-laden movies. Tell them about how exciting it is to be at the theater and hang out with your friends and have that piping hot popcorn. That's what.
Well, Radesh, I think, to your point, the amenities include things like recliners.
Yes,
we have seen recliners. Things like Dolby Atmos presentations.
Yep.
It's very clear through the questions that people do value those presentation, digital projection.
Yes.
Again, Dolby Sound, Atmos, all of those things have a significant advantage. And when you add the smell of the popcorn and nachos and the rest of the environment, that is much more pleasurable and desired than maybe sitting at home and just watching a movie.
Absolutely. And that's covered by this. The presentation quality at movie theaters is unmatched. So they love the fact that the quality of the film and the digital sound systems, all that adds to that, which they cannot get at home with or without a home theater. I mean, it doesn't matter. Okay. They also think that, the movie options, relative price value and convenience are important criteria. When you're comparing streaming with theaters, these are the top three that come to mind about how we can do it. And of course, we already talked about this. The reason that they go to the movie theater is to see movies they want. These are new blockbuster movies. So the relationship with studios is going to be critical no matter what in the future. Okay. And there is obviously a case to be made for, a happy medium between theaters and streaming, and there is opportunity to coexist. People are not going to give up one for the other. The older moviegoers are more in agreement with this than the younger ones. So I don't know what the future holds, but right now, the older generations are still holding on to the idea that movie theaters should exist and they can coexist. Men generally have a more positive opinion. The movie theaters generally enjoy a very positive image, and they're seen as an integral part of the community. They have better quality service than other industries. And however, the fact that the younger population has a less positive posture about movie theaters demands the movie theater industry's attention. There's stuff that we need to do in order to get them back or change their beliefs about movie theaters because of streaming. It's all happening because of streaming. They're younger. They grew up with computers and laptops and handheld devices, and that's the issue here.
Radesh, I would kind of add, first of all, the 18 to 24-year-old really, because of their income, is resorting to something that's more affordable. And that is in the second sentence that you put there, or well, in the previous one, where we mentioned that the streaming advantages are price valued. And so probably the 18 to 24-year-old is leaning in that direction. But it's important, I think, for all of us, if you're a theater exhibitor, we have to keep the theaters clean. We have to continue to add innovation because that's our advantage right now. Those amenities that you can't get at home. Kind of in summary, I was looking for some sort of an analogy that I could draw that might explain this maybe a little less academia. And I thought back to when we had radio and they invented the television. Radio had to do some pivoting because television kind of stole some of the pizzazz of media, and radio became what I'll call mobile device for information and music, whereas televisions became that stabilized appliance in your home where you could get it. And so in truth, radio never went away. Radio is still very strong. It found a niche. It found its place. And TVs have been very, very popular, as we can see. And so movie theaters need to do kind of the same thing. They need to find, we as theater operators have to find what our strengths are and play to those strengths. And there's always going to be some other avenue of entertainment, but movie theaters still have the highest quality in presentation. They have amenities. They have an emotional contact where people can gather and see things together. Whereas, when you're sitting at home and you're watching a particular feature with 2 or 3 people, while it's might be fun, it's more of a pastime than it is entertainment. And so I think what this really told us is that theaters and streaming services can coexist. I think from your first slides, streaming devices and streaming services should be more concerned about the competition that's arising. For example, PlayStation is now gone because of the other competitive networks that are now streaming. I think that's where streaming is going to have to pay attention to, are they going to survive or not? But I think you did a great job, Radesh, pulling all this information together. So I congratulate
Well,
you.
you did too. So,
we
folks,
have a few minutes. We do have a few minutes for questions. If the audience have any, just use the Q&A format down on the bottom of the Zoom picture that you have. Also, remember, all of this is being recorded. So it'll be online starting next week. So if you missed any slides, you'll have access to it starting next week. Larry, I think what's also imperative is to describe what alternative functions movie theaters can use. In both your cases, I think you have a unique paradigm that you've created with the University of Memphis. Can you explain that to the audience?
Yes, and this is a situation where we have to give Radesh a lot of credit. And this is where forming partnerships in the community really works. So Radesh has mentioned that I serve on the board for Kemmons Wilson School. But Radesh brought to me the predicament that the university is having, where they want to do face-to-face learning, but the school classrooms at the University of Memphis are so small, they can't keep the social distance rules of 6 foot and still have face-to-face. And he saw our auditoriums at Malco as being one of those solutions. And the University of Memphis Law School, for example, is situated downtown, and it's only a few blocks from our powerhouse location. And they have some 75 students that need to meet in auditorium style places for their presentations and lectures. So the law school is now leasing or renting 2 of our larger auditoriums that seat 270 plus individuals, and they can socially distance 75 students. They can use the screen. They bring their own digital mobile projector. They have their own sound system that's attached to the cart. I'll call it a cart for lack of better terms. And so the instructor can actually do the presentations face-to-face in those in that environment. And we have the same options at our Paradiso location, where various schools such as the engineering school or the Kemmons Wilson School or the math department and the economics department, they can use those particular auditoriums as teaching forums as opposed to just doing online. So we're going to experiment with that in the spring of 2021. And we're getting a lot of conversation. The problem is funding right now. Radesh can address this, but universities are no different in that they've lost a considerable amount of funding, probably at least 50% funding, Radesh, am I right?
well, yeah, I don't want to put any numbers on a recorded screen, but
Yeah, but
yeah.
significant. And so
Yeah, significant.
finding money to lease the facilities is going to be a challenge on a case-to-case basis. But there seems to be a synergy that would work where schools, even high schools, could use auditoriums large enough to do their face-to-face learning.
Well, I think the reason I bring that up is that think outside the box. Churches, schools, concerts. There are ways of using your facility beyond just movie theater.
Right.
Oh yeah, I mean we're all trying to figure that out right now. But you know, when you said a couple of interesting things there, like concerts. It's really hard to make any money when you only have 70 people or 50 people in an auditorium when it seats 200. So, you know, those gathering places is a little bit difficult. What we're trying to do is find pockets of meeting groups of around 25 to 50 that then can fit into our auditoriums. And that's the real challenge. You know, the number is the issue with social distancing. So who knows, maybe by next summer with the vaccine out and everything else, we'll get back to, you know.
Gentlemen, we have one question. Did you ask the question about windows? If the film is playing at the theater and streaming at the same time, where would individuals rather watch? Did we ask that question?
Okay, let me understand the question. Can you say that again, Dan?
Radesh, I'll repeat.
Okay, go ahead.
The question, the concern of the exhibitor is reduced release windows. So in other words, what happens if a movie is released the streaming on the same day that it's presented to theaters. What will people do? Will they stay at home and watch it, or they go to the movie theaters? I think that's the pointed question.
Yes.
We did not ask that specific question. What we did uncover is that if given a choice, people would rather see movies in theater before they would stream it. Where theaters are going to be challenged is the convenience factor and the price factor. So for example, I think Disney released Milan, and you had to have Disney Plus, which means you were paying a fee for that service, a monthly fee. Then you had to pay $32 for the movie, and then you had to pay whatever the taxes or convenience fees were. So let's just say it was $35. I know that my wife and I can go see Milan at a movie theater for less than $35, if that makes sense. So one of the things that we're sensing is that if these streaming services start to charge as much as they are, it's a reverse on what we found in research. In other words, it's not a price value. So once streaming loses that advantage of price and convenience, then everything weighs more towards movie theaters, and the window really doesn't seem to be a factor at that point. What's pushing people to streaming right now is convenience and price. They're not having to pay as much.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for being part of today's session. Thank you for the research. We will certainly make it available to our members over the next few months. Chris, it's all yours. Let's wrap it up.
Thank you. Let me stop sharing, Chris, for you.
Okay,
there
I
you go.
think I've already done that, Radesh, but thank you
Okay,
very
good.
much.
Good.
Okay. All right, a few reminders. Your one link that you signed up for will get you into all NAC educational sessions and the annual meeting. And I think Dan had mentioned earlier, the copper cane wine testing on tomorrow afternoon is a separate link. That link is available on the ReTreat page on naconline.org. And also yesterday we did send out an Outlook invitation on that as well. And many of you responded to the positive on that, and we hope you enjoyed that. I want to remind you to get out and get some exercise. Visit the ReTreat page, and you can see the details about our virtual fun run and walk. There's no registration involved. In fact, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do tomorrow morning or sometime this week, get out and enjoy a walk or run. Take a selfie of yourself and get that to us via social media, or send us an email at info@naconline.org. And the first 30 submitted selfies will receive a free beach towel courtesy of Motion in Motion. Also on the ReTreat page on naconline.org, we have fabulous venue tours that are done either via video or other means. But we've got a great walkthrough through the recently remodeled lacrosse center. A great highlight tour of the Legends Stadium, Legends at AT&T Stadium in Dallas-Fort Worth. The Tivoli Theater, we have a really cool walk-around tool on the ReTreat page, and then also a sizzle reel of the Amway Center in Orlando. Also, we have a bonus feature page. We just launched episode 3 of Laboring with a Multi-Generational Workforce, and Larry, of course, is the host of that. The podcast series, and we've enjoyed over 260 listens to our podcast so far, and the new episode is out, so please avail yourself to that. And then also Dan earlier in the year did a resume refocused webinar. We've got a recording of that for unfortunately the folks out there who are displaced right now, and we wanted to think of those folks and give those folks some great reminders on some job seeking skills. That leads us to maybe the highlight of the day. We've got so many great door prizes from our great supplier members. And the first one is a PPE care box courtesy of Royal Corporation. And the winner is Martin Hubbard of M&M Entertainment. Next, we've got a 5-pound Hershey bar courtesy of the Hershey Company. And the winner is Joshua Jensen of MJR Digital Cinemas. Next, we have 2 stay-home pretzel kits courtesy of Ben's Soft Pretzels. The winner is Robbie Arrington of Regal. Next, we have a gift pack of fudge courtesy of Nate's Candy Jar. And the winner is Jack Wagner of Southern Theaters. And finally, a snowboard courtesy of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. And the winner is, and we mentioned that the Lacrosse Center a little earlier, Dave leads the tour of that, but Dave Giefer is the winner of the snowboard.
They don't
So
have
those-
snow in lacrosse.
They do actually have snow in Lacrosse.
I want to see Dave on that snowboard. That's what
Yeah, so do I. This afternoon, don't forget, we've got the super session, the buyer-seller relationship session, featuring Teresa Boyson and Kim Cook-Serrano. They will be leading that session. Encourage you to drop back in here in just a little bit at 12 noon Central. With that being said, that concludes today's session. Dan, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you very much, both of you, for being part of the presentation today. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the relationship we have with the University of Memphis. They've been wonderful hosts. Thank you.
Thank you. We enjoyed it. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Bye.